Welcome to the Pan-African Activist Sunday School. My name is Bwesije Bwamwesijire, and I'm here with Nanri Nafsaiga and Crystal Strong, among others. And we're going to take you for the next two and a half hours to discuss the neo-colonial betrayal of Haiti. So, to start off, I'm going to ask Nanri to tell us about the Pan-African Activist Sunday School, and then we'll tell you how the schedule is going to move. And remember to always send us questions on any of the streams, on any of the channels where you're tuning in from, and we will be able to ask these questions to the panelists. So Nanri, take it away.
Yeah, hi, good morning, good afternoon, good night to everyone here. You're very welcome. We're very excited to bring you this important Sunday school today. This Sunday school is a project of the Pan-African Activist Collective that myself and my comrade and co-convener, Crystal Strong, who is behind the scenes on tech, started in 2020. And the collective is a space for activists to have conversations with other activists around the world, to discuss strategies, tactics, history, and to really just come together with people who are fighting on the front lines. And so the Pan African Activist Sunday School is also in that vein, which is really to bring not just scholars and people who are writing or talking about this in journalistic ways, but actually people who are living the lives of organizers, but also studying and going deep into the movement spaces. And so we're very happy to have a very important conversation today, as well as another one coming up next week. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who is here listening to this.
Thank you so much, Nanri, for that introduction. So today's conversation is going to focus on a crisis that has not received as much attention as it should have, which is a situation in Haiti. We're going to talk about the Pan-Africanist dimension or perspective to this situation. Briefly, the United States of America and its allies have led a campaign to frame the situation in Haiti as one of chaos and lawlessness, particularly using media stereotypes such as calling it a place that is run by gangsters, a lawless place. Think of all the tropes of Africa or Black people as lawless and unhinged, and therefore requiring control. Unfortunately, they have chosen to work with African majority countries, or countries that have big populations of people of African descent, particularly Kenya, that they are asking to, that they have made a partnership with to intervene by sending police troops there. So what we're doing today is to go back into the history of Africa, but also global Pan-African history, to see how similar situations, or not necessarily the same on all fours, but related situations have been dealt with previously. And we're looking at the 1960s as a peak for Pan-Africanist movement that was led by newly independent African states. And we want to pick some lessons from the foreign policies of those independence era governments. So we're going to listen to various speakers that are going to tell us about that history, and we will be able to relate that history to contemporary times. And from this conversation, but also our conversations that will be started by this session, we want to see ways in which we can proactively engage with the 1960s project of global African freedom. Of course, I'm thinking about Kwame Nkrumah's words that Ghana's independence would be meaningless if the entire Africa is not free. But now, and of course, as one of the speakers will tell us, Nkrumah did not just think of Africa as a continental bloc, but also Africa's diaspora. To set the stage, we are going to first listen to Dr. Mamira Prosper. So I'm going to briefly introduce her, and then she will take about 15 minutes to give us a background of what is happening in Haiti now and how we have reached at the stage that we have reached. Mamira Prosper is an activist and assistant professor of global and international studies at the University of California, Irvine, and her work focuses on Haitian social movements. As she's also the international coordinator of the Pan-African Solidarity Network, community movement builders, and works to amplify the struggles of the people of Haiti. Her work has appeared in NACLA, and she's currently working on a monograph entitled Development Contested in Occupied Haiti, Social Movements, NGOs, and the Evangelical State. Mamira is no stranger to the Pan-African Activist Sunday School. She's spoken on at least one other episode before. So it's such a pleasure to welcome Mamira back to the Sunday School.
Thank you, Vasily. I appreciate the invite, and I do remember the last time I was here on this show. I was actually in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Today I'm in California, and I'm hoping to, do some updating and hopefully highlight what I believe I would have highlighted then, which is to view this so-called crisis as struggle. And I want to give a little bit of background on what the current struggle is in Haiti and, what the features of this conjunctural moment that we're seeing are, and sometimes prevents us from actually seeing what is behind, right, the theatrics. So we know, as Boye introduced the topic, that in October 2023, the United Nations Security Council voted to authorize the deployment of a multinational security support mission that would be headed by Kenya to Haiti. While Russia and China abstained, they too condemned the increasing violence, criminal activities, and human rights abuses and violations which undermined the peace, stability, and security of Haiti and the region. A few months prior, the Caribbean community, CARICOM, had expressed its own support for the restoration of law and order in the country. The United States pledged hundreds of millions of dollars to assist military troops. In addition to 1,000 Kenyan police officers, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Suriname, Antigua and Barbuda, Guatemala, Peru, Senegal, Rwanda, Italy, Spain, and Mongolia promised armed contingents. The Security Council vote followed former acting president and de facto as an unelected Prime Minister Ariel Henry's second request. So I hope we heard that, right? The same person functioning as Prime Minister, but also acting president. If some folks have been following, what's happening in Haiti since 2021 with the assassination of also de facto President Jovenel Moïse, he had just named this prime minister. And this prime minister, according to Haitian constitutional order, should have been ratified by parliament. But there was no parliament, being that parliament had been disbanded in 2020. So when Jovenel Moïse is assassinated, he's essentially collapsed the legislative power into the executive, right? He's really become a dictator. And so when he names Ariel Henry, of course, it's just, there is no democratic process, right? There's no check and balance. And he's assassinated. Ariel Henry then is confirmed through a tweet by the US Embassy, right? So this is the context for the call. Who's making this call? And he's made the call before in 2022. He makes the call again in 2023 in September at the UN meetings. And he urges the international community, this is Ariel Henry, to act in the name of women and girls raped every day, in the name of an entire people victim of the barbarity of gangs. A few months prior, his Minister of Justice and Public Security, also serving as Minister of Culture and Communication of Haiti, so one person holding two posts, two ministries, Emeline Prophet, had claimed that neighborhoods overrun by urban guerrillas were lost territories in a radio television show targeting viewers in Haiti and its diasporas. She evaded responsibility for her government, instead pointing to private individuals as manufacturers of terror. So according to the Réseau National de Défense des Droits Humains, which is a human rights organization in Haiti, between November 2018 and mid 2021, there were 13 massacres, right, with hundreds of people murdered, hundreds of kidnappings, tens and 20, collective rapes that accompanied the massacres, and targeting children as well, right? So we can think about the number of people who also became orphans, hundreds of homes burnt, and of course, over 500,000 people in Port-au-Prince displaced. And that's some of the numbers, right, coming out of the work from NGOs on the ground. And so there are numbers we're not even capturing in terms of the impacts of the gang warfare, quote unquote, right, in the capital on the rest of the country. And in turn, and we can see the ways that Haitians ended up at the US-Mexico border, and they were essentially the folks who were escaping land grabs, but also, right, gang incursion in certain parts of Port-au-Prince. And we could get into that if we have more time later. But at the beginning of this period, right, this 2018, the armed groups had acted, it seemed, in isolation and in competition with one another. However, in August 2020, right, a few months after, as I said, Parliament was disbanded because elections for parliamentary seats had been delayed. And this was essentially a constant strategy that this particular party had already applied since after the 2010 earthquake elections. It was to delay parliamentary elections in order for the executive to rule by decree. So this continued on. And in that same year, we saw that the 9 major gangs were federated under the leadership of former police officer Jimmy Cherizier, aka Barbecue, that everyone's talking about. And it was to ensure that, quote, people of the ghetto would get theirs, unquote. This is an effort that Haiti's National Commission of Disarmament, Dismantlement, and Reinsertion sort of applauded. He said, now we can negotiate with them as a bloc, right? This is how we're going to move towards disarming them. But in January 2024, Cherizier consolidated the rest of the gangs in the capital to launch, quote, a revolution. First, they took control of the international airport surroundings to prevent de facto Prime Minister Al-Yanahi from returning to Haiti after his trip to Kenya. And over the last month, they bulldozed police stations and prisons, burned down public hospitals, universities, and libraries. And they also destroyed the Court of Accounts offices where government spending receipts are archived, including the dossiers concerning the Petro-Caribe arrangement with Venezuela, right? So if we think about what they're actually targeting to understand the so-called revolution that they've launched. And I think some of us are a little confused by some of the language that they're leveraging, and because of the anti-Blackness that is generally constructed in talking about Haiti, are wanting to be very careful about how we frame them. But I think that because some of us are coming out of so-called Black majority countries, we understand also the ways that African descended people in those contexts, right, or African people are the ones who actually held the guns, right? They are the ones who constitute the death squads. They're the primary people that the population is confronting, right? Anyway, so to replace Henri's government, CARICOM facilitated the setup of a presidential council with 7 presidents, all men, and the majority representing the party in power and allies. So then this is a party that's been in power since 2011, right? Outweighing who we would call the progressives, the Famille Valas, and those who came together under the Montana Accords. So in May 2024, the council's first act was to confirm the international community's commitment to pursue the mission, right, the UN mission backed by the United States, led by Kenya, Despite popular denunciation of the 13-year UN occupation from 2004 to 2017 that Haiti had already experienced that had failed, and that essentially served as a cover for the arming of the gangs, right? So additionally, the basic demands of the people, um, to what they call in Creole chavirer chaudière, break with the system that had been formulated to the question of Could Cob Petro-Caribea, where is the Petro-Caribe money, has been completely sidelined. Right, so the mainstream international news about Haiti's crisis is transmitted as a problem of gang violence beyond the control of the state. Yet before Henri's 2022 and 2023 requests, social movement and human rights organizations, as well as social media activists, had noticed his crushing silence around the thousands massacred and kidnapped during his illegal term, and the PHTK, the party in power's general denial of these acts of terrorism, right? Especially since 2018. Moreover, there were reports produced by Haitian human rights organizations, as well as international entities like Harvard Law School and the UN Security Council panel, as well as independent research by Haitian social scientists, like clearly pointing to the manufacturing of the chaos by various national, international, and transnational actors, including state and other diplomatic functionaries, right? So it's important to view the current events in Haiti beyond a crisis that's resolvable through military occupation, elections, and good governance, but rather in terms, as I was saying earlier, of a struggle of historical proportions with conjunctural features over the last decade that we need to be able to untangle, which is to understand the relationship, the struggle between the people of Haiti and the neo-colonial state in Haiti, right? And yes, we're asking, right, who are the gangs? And we want to understand that I think we're all coming, especially those of us located in the States, through an abolitionist framework about how to rethink um, those, brothers of ours who have decided to be the puppets, right, of the imperialist and forwarding genocide, right? But also we understand why. I want us to get to the question of the why the gangs and why now. Why did they enter as this actor in 2018, right? That essentially comes to be an actor that social movement folks are going to call, right, paramilitary, seeing them act in concert with the projects of the PHTK, right, that particular party's plan for development and push back against the people who had been resisting, right? So the gangs essentially, yes, are folks who are coming out of what folks call in Haiti popular neighborhoods, right? Places that have little to no access to potable water, electricity, schools, hospitals, and jobs, territories abandoned by the state. Some of them are in the state's map sometimes, right? And some of them are informal settlements where more than 1 million people live, right? So most gangs are concentrated in the Port-au-Prince metropolitan area near industrial parks, international ports, petroleum distribution centers, warehouses of imported luxury goods and foodstuff, and along international and international trade routes, right? So they are specifically in neighborhoods that came to be constituted, particularly around the 70s and over the decades, around places where these industrial merchant capitalists needed workers, right? But there was no actual housing planned and provided. So folks come and they settled informally, and it was to essentially serve as workers to these points of accumulation, right, in the place. So without, right, the state actually taking on these places and ensuring, as I said, access to all things that people need in life, um, the gangs became, right, de facto leaders, of course, especially in places as informal settlements are not recognized on the state's map. That means that there are also no seats provided for these particular constituencies, right, to be able to have someone even represent them in a parliament that, of course, came to not exist. So if the first gangs of the 1990s were extensions of self-defense brigades established after the fall of the Duvalier regime in 1986 to protect popular neighborhoods in Port-au-Prince from death squads that were there to maintain the dictatorial rule, and later on petty thefts, right? The gangs of today were strengthened or established by the actual party rulers. They are them. They are the death squads themselves, right? They traffic organs and humans, drugs and arms. They kidnap on behalf of others and to raise funds to buy ammunition. They kill to conquer new territory, etc. Right? They also provide security to private businesses like merchant capitalists, and these are all names that have been reported. They break up strikes for hire by politicians like former President Michel Martelly, who was the first PHTK president in 2011. Right, gangs threaten voters to control election results and to prevent participation in protests. Right, that's the big part that I think we sort of lose when the focus gets on the gangs, is that when we look at the 2018 moment when they grew in power, and when they started enacting, coordinating, right, massacres that were targeting popular neighborhoods that were known for their militancy since, they were established, right, in the 70s. These are folks who were always prepared and battling against dictatorship, right, battling against the effects of neoliberalism. They're the ones who swell in numbers, right, in the protests against this particular regime. And we see the gangs coming in and coordinating massacres in November 2018 after two major events, which were the first Pays Loc, which is understood as a general strike when the country essentially shut down over 2 days, and the people were protesting the Jovenel Moise's, the assassinated president's, acquiescence, right, agreement to remove gas subsidies as per the dictates of the IMF, right? The International Monetary Fund says, no, the state can't subsidize gas. This is the only thing the state provides as protection for the Haitian people. And that means, right, transportation prices go up when gas prices go up, right? No longer subsidized. That means food prices go up. And so, of course, people needed to express dissent, right? And this is after Jovenel Moise had pulled out of the Petrocaribe agreement with Venezuela. So now Haiti's back on, right, the market. And essentially, right, folks are understanding the ways in which the removal of the gas subsidies are going to impact their lives. We're talking about gas by the gallon costing more than minimum wage per day in Haiti, right? So what does that mean for folks in terms of being able to have access to this very important commodity, right, that makes all the things run? So essentially, the gangs are going to be a response to this Pays Loc, and essentially afterwards, what we call the Petro-Caribe Challenge, right, movement that came to ask this question: where is the Petro-Caribe money? And it was particularly around. There were many funds that had been stolen by the state before, right? But the Petro-Caribe was a particular kind of fund that was designed to favor small Caribbean nation states, including Haiti, in terms of accessing petroleum products, right? And essentially, they had the opportunity to repay over the course of, right, an entire generation. And you can repay in bananas, right? The interest rate was low, and this is not the same condition at IMF, right? World Bank loans. And it's outside of the international monetary system, right, that the United States controls. So in effect, Petrocaribe was particularly, yes, Petrocaribe was particularly important in terms of a general rally, a general point of rally for folks to ask of the state accounts on how they had used the Petrocaribe funds that this is the kind of fund that allows folks to actually fund social programs, to actually provide state protection, right, other subsidies, and to build infrastructure. And yet the country had seen that money squandered, billions of dollars again. So this is the where that we should understand, right? That there's been a struggle that's been taking place, and we are seeing one piece of it, right? But it comes after a decade's worth of struggle on the ground. So I have been asked to mind my time, so I am ready to stop here, and I can take questions later if folks have points of clarification they need.
Thank you so much for this very detailed and very important history that oftentimes is so lacking in the analysis of the picture of what's going on in Haiti. So we really appreciate you and all the work that you do, both in terms of scholarship and activism. Um, so just as we are moving along, we have so much to discuss today. The next speaker is going to discuss the structural betrayal of the neo-colonial state in Africa. Vukoni Lupa Lasaga from Ubuntu Reading Group is a veteran Ugandan journalist, editor in chief of the Journal of Disruptive Technology, and a member of the Ubuntu Reading Group. So, welcome, Comrade Vukoni. I'm sorry, I don't know if I pronounced your name right, so please go ahead and introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've actually called my name properly, as my mother would have done. um, and I need to make a little correction. I'm not actually the editor of that magazine or, let's say, journal. I think that designation may have entered as a result of the confusion. That being said, I'm really happy to be here with this group, which I know has been doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of raising consciousness of our people concerning the situation in Haiti. Now, when we talk about colonialism or neocolonialism, it will be in order for me to really basically have certain definitions. Kwame Nkrumah, in his book, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism, says that the essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policies directed from outside. And I would really recommend for all Pan-Africanists to read Kwame Nkrumah's works, because they really highlight not just what was happening at the time he and other comrades were struggling for the independence of the African colonies of European imperialism. Kwame Nkrumah is really important in terms of the theory of neocolonialism, because he points out things that up to now are still relevant and quite poignant in terms of the character and the structures of neocolonialism. He goes on to say that the ways in which the neo-colonial imperialists, who are really kind of the imperial powers who withdrew from the direct control of their colonies after granting, in many cases, what has been correctly called as flag independence to the African countries. But there are institutions that they have left in place that they use to directly and indirectly control the neo-colonial states, which are actually the former colonies. And one way of control is the direct garrisoning of the imperialist military in the neo-colonies. And France has been very blatant in this, in terms of still having the Foreign Legion stationed in a number of African countries. Over time, the United States has also taken over that role of neo-colonial power. And we are probably all aware of how the United States sought actively to locate the center of or the headquarters of its AFRICOM, that is the US Army, which is really basically carrying out control and missions that are near and dear to United States imperial interests on the African continent, and maybe even other regions of strategic interest to them. They tried so hard to locate the headquarters in Africa. It proved to be a really big problem. This was during President Barack Obama's administration. And we, those of us who have been following these things and remember, would perhaps recall how at the time, even the most abject lackeys of the United States in Africa were petrified to be identified with this move for the United States to be having its boots right there, located on African soil. Of course, in the end, the United States tactically decided that it was too divisive and in your face to relocate the headquarters of AFRICOM from Stuttgart in Germany on African soil, but they did something that is comparatively also similar, in the sense that now they have all sorts of missions, overt and covert, and training, let's say even maybe military maneuvers with the national armies of the neo-colonial states in Africa, so that this way of control that Kwame Nkrumah pointed out long ago is still quite active. I would recommend, and in this situation, there are very few saints, if at all there are any saints or any innocents among all of the African states, maybe with the exception of a country like Eritrea, that I don't think has any relationship with AFRICOM, but everybody else is in bed, for the most part, with the United States military presence in Africa. There were instances of quietly certain armies resisting the United States attempts to be very heavily invested militarily in Africa. And Tanzania, to its credit, was one of those countries. If one reads the archives, the diplomatic archives that WikiLeaks dumped in the public domain, it is amazing the kind of conversations that were going on between the so-called heads of state and their cabinets and other bureaucrats and politicians across Africa, having these conversations behind the scenes with the United States embassies based in their countries, to the extent that you really see the level of betrayal that daily our politicians and bureaucrats engage in, the betrayal of Africa's interests. In Tanzania, things worked differently. Up to the time that Jakaya Kikwete was running as a candidate to become a president of Tanzania, the Tanzanian army had one, that is the Jeshi la Wananchi wa Tanzania, the People's Defense Forces. It said clearly that they were formed as an army of African liberation, and they did not want to have any relationship with the United States Army. Until Jakaya Kikwete came along, and just before he was inaugurated, he actually went to the United States Embassy in Dar es Salaam, and they had a very long conversation with the ambassador. And the outcome of that conversation was Kikwete promising to dismiss or retire all of those generals who were resistant to the idea of the United States Army having a relationship with the Tanzanian army. And the rest is history. So that AFRICOM is present in Tanzania, of course, on a much lower profile than in certain countries. But just to go on, there are other ways in which the neocolonial imperial powers exercise control over Africa, including controlling the commanding heights of our economies, control of the government machinery through ensnaring the neocolonial state to depend on Western aid. And Nkrumah had said also something about aid way back, basically saying aid to a neocolonial state is merely a revolving credit paid by the neocolonial master, passing through the neocolonial master in the form of increased profits. So we end up getting very little out of it. Now, the phenomenon or the reality of neocolonialism manifests in certain structures of neocolonial imperialism in Africa. The neocolonial state itself is one of the structures of imperialism, because what really happened at independence was our African states basically, or the Africans who took over this machinery, never really bothered to transform or dismantle the colonial state. It just acquired the new occupants of the institutions that were used to oppress Africans. All of those instruments of terror were still in place, and if you go one by one in all of the African countries, you will find that this machinery is still very much in place. Maybe certain cosmetic changes were made here and there, but in reality, the neocolonial state and those who are in charge of it in Africa still do the bidding of the neocolonial imperial masters. You would also see Christianity and its institutions, Islam and its institutions, the diplomatic missions of the neocolonial imperialists, organizations such as Francophonie, the British Commonwealth, the World Bank and IMF, international philanthropy, multinational corporations, ad nauseam, all of these institutions are part of the infrastructure of the neocolonial imperial powers. And in reality, there are so many ways in which they corrupt the African ruling elites, from sitting on the boards of multinational corporations to paying outright bribes. I have, in my work as a journalist and a scholar, ended up interviewing people who are really key to some of the most important events that happened in the course of African history, especially the history of the liberation of the settler colonial states in Southern Africa and Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verde. So you find really very the corrupting influences of these institutions are so immense. To some extent, it's really surprising that we are still able to resist the total, let's say, domination of our countries. Now, one other thing that we should note, since the time Kwame Nkrumah called for the unity of Africa, really basically creating a Pan-Africanist federal state, uniting all of these neo-colonies that were jealously protecting their subservience to Western imperial interests. So I have been told that I've run out of time, but what I should say in conclusion is that the betrayal of Africa and its diaspora is happening on a daily basis by people who actually man the structures of what is supposedly independent African states. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Konlu Palasaga, for that very brilliant summary of the status quo and the history of how we have reached this point. We are going to go deeper now by taking some case studies. So the broad sweep that Fukoni brought to the table. Now we're going to get into some details. But before we do that, I want to remind you who are tuned in, who are watching, listening through X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, to please send questions. Please send questions and comments and suggestions on whichever platform you are joining us from, so that we will put these to the panelists, but also bring them into that conversation. So not only are we encouraging you to send questions, but also comments, thoughts, additions, and other things that you want to contribute to the discourse. So we are now going to move into particular case studies from 20th century Pan-Africanist history. So we're going to look at the time when Southern African countries were still under either white minority rule or apartheid or direct colonialism. To take us through this will first be Dr. Toivo Ashike, and this is who Dr. Toivo is. Dr. Toivo Ashike is also a regular panelist on the Sunday School. So regular attendees of the Sunday School are familiar with Dr. Ashike. He's a scholar activist whose research interests intersect the disciplines of historical sociology, history, and Africana studies. He focuses on Southern African liberation struggle history, Black power studies, Haitian revolution studies, and political economy. His recent book, entitled Arming Black Consciousness, that came out last year, focuses on exploring hidden fronts of South Africa's liberation movement through a focus on the Black consciousness movement and its return to armed struggle from 1967 to 1993. Ashike is also a committed grassroots social justice activist, as I have said. Welcome, Ashike, and as usual, it's a pleasure to learn from you. Take it away.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you, comrade, for this. Got my little timer up, so hopefully we can get this thing together. Okay, folks. So in the interest of time, we'll try to be very brief, give you some brief, specific examples, and then bring things from history to the contemporary moment. So one of the first examples of just concrete solidarity that again was essential and critical, right? The solidarity among the Southern African liberation movements with the wider Black international and of course the wider third world struggle, but we'll focus on the Black internationalist Pan-African links to begin with. It was essential, right? It was impossible, we understood, given the global nature of capitalist colonialism, colonial capitalism, global repression. It is impossible to understand your revolution in your own location, independent of the global forces that are also being mobilized to repress your locality. Simultaneously, as many of the radicals did say at the same time, is that you can have global solidarity, Black solidarity within the international, but you must also be grounded in your community. And so if you're not grounded in your own community, right, your ability to give material, tangible solidarity to the liberation movements is limited. It doesn't mean your spirit is not good, or doesn't mean that your commitment as an individual to the wider struggle is to be ignored. But if we are talking about what we need to remove ourselves from the Portuguese colonialists, from the white settler colonialists in Southern Africa, there are some clear, direct things that we need you to be able to do, right? So simultaneously, right, global solidarity, as we said before, it extends outside of the Black international into the third world, and particularly given the genocide that has been happening in Palestine, that is being accelerated in their own final solution, if you will, from the Israeli white settlers right now, right? Part of our solidarity with the Southern African liberation movements was with Palestine. So one of the examples I'll give is from the Islandwana revolutionary effort, which was one of the Black consciousness armed wings that formed in the late 70s into the early 1980s, right? They were trained by what was called the Abu Nidal faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organization at the time in Iraq, right? And they were being trained concretely in just how to have weapons training, bomb training, right? Fake passports to forge currencies, to be able to move throughout Europe, to be able to mobilize the student population, to be able to get guns into Botswana, to be able to infiltrate into South Africa directly. Just because you're revolutionary doesn't mean you have some of these skills, right? So they were able to work with the Abu Nidal faction to get them out of Botswana, where many of them were located, to go through East African routes, to go to Iraq, to be trained over a period of months in these concrete weapons training, to be able to, and as well these forging passports, et cetera, to be able to return home to fight the Boers. Now, during their training in the early 1980s, the Palestinians are at war with the Israelis. And so many of the comrades who were in the Islandwana revolutionary effort, IRE for short, they actually wanted to stay and said, no, we want to fight with you against the Israelis. But the Abu Nidal faction said, no, your job is to liberate Azania. The liberation of Azania will be a direct help to us in our fight against the Israeli white settlers. It was, again, a message that has reverberated across these revolutionaries. Cabral would say the same thing on his tour of Afro-America, right? If you will, the Black American struggle, if you will, in the early 1970s, before his assassination, of course, after Mondlane of Frelimo was assassinated, right? He gives a talk at Syracuse, and there's a whole bunch of talks amongst a lot of Black radicals, as well as white leftists in the US. And part of his message was very, very clear. He was clear that, yes, we don't mind many of you saying you want to come in to fight with us, right? Of course, we want your solidarity, right? But also your solidarity has to be in the liberation of Black people where you are located. Because the fight against, right, white supremacy and capitalism and oppression, right, in the United States is indispensable from our liberation of the continent. So you must also be grounded in a local struggle in order to be able to tangibly and materially contribute to our global liberation. And that message is mostly I'm giving right now for today's generation. The local can never be divided from the international as well. I think there is almost a level of exotification of the global, if not an escape from the harsh day-to-day realities of just the grind of the day-to-day struggle in your localities. Right? That local struggle is the that we're going to need to be able to do things globally. And to tie with that, my father being an activist with SWAPO in the most definitely in the 1980s in the US, part of his job was to build, particularly with the Black American groups, but with any groups that wanted to have solidarity with our struggle. And one of the things he was very, very clear upon was that, listen, what does it mean to say that your group has solidarity with SWAPO, with ANC, with PAC, with the Southern African liberation struggles, but you're not doing marches against Black people who are being shot in the United States? You're not fighting against the prison industrial complex. It wasn't called that in the 80s, but you're not fighting against the incarceration, if you will, of Black people there, right? You're not fighting against racism in the day-to-day realities of Black people where you are, but somehow you have global solidarity. This doesn't work. The argument is you also have to be fighting that concrete struggle where you are at, and that is the basis of the tangible support that we need to fight globally. So one of the examples, for example, to be used is that there was in the 1970s, the exact dates is escaping me, but you have a Black labor union which stopped shipments that were coming illegally from Rhodesia at the time through US ports. Why is this important? Because you had a Black labor union that is tied very much some of the Black radical labor organizing coming out of Detroit and some of these places, right? With some of these radical organizations coming out of the 1960s into the 1970s. But they had a base in the union. They had been building for the day-to-day struggles of Black union workers in the car factories, and they expanded to the dock workers. And because they had that local power base, they were able to give a higher level of direct solidarity and a very visible act of solidarity to not unload chrome, which was coming from Rhodesia at the time illegally into the US markets. That is concrete, it is direct, right? And that is impossible if you haven't been building a labor union and being focused on your local conditions, not just dreaming of international solidarity. Yes, dreams are important, but plans are also effective as well, right? Closer to home, in the liberation movements, many of the African liberation movements, particularly in Southern Africa, had direct links of solidarity with each other. And sometimes we also need to also not forget that we also have neighbors across the border. So ZANU-PF, right? The Zimbabwean African National Union, right? They formed an alliance in the early 1970s with Frelimo, the Mozambique Liberation Front, right? More officially in 1972. And because of the borders of the two countries, the tangible solidarity that Frelimo was giving, particularly after 74 and 75, when they achieved their own flag independence, is they serve as a rear base, right? For ZANU to be able to have their military camps there. They can train comrades, they can get people who are leaving the country. And Frelimo had a military wing that was effective, that could at least, fight back with the Rhodesians when they would send their planes over, send their military over, to give people a chance to get some training, to get some, ideological orientation as they then re-infiltrated into Zimbabwe. Again, tangible, concrete, and it cannot happen if Frelimo themselves have not been building with their own people. It's not just to get angry at your local people because they're not having global solidarity, which I see today too fucking much, just to be very honest. We cannot be denigrating our own masses for not having certain kinds of global solidarity if we have not been doing the work to mobilize them for their own day-to-day realities. We love to quote Cabral, but we don't like to live some of Cabral's messages, right? It says, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. What does he say in the opening lines? To paraphrase is, people are not fighting for ideas in the sky. They're not fighting for Pan-Africanism just there in the clouds. They are fighting for concrete, detailed things. We want food. We want water. We want a safety for our children and a level of future for them. We want our land. Now, you can get that, we argue on the left, Pan-Africanist, through a Pan-Africanist vision. But if they believe that they can get this through a capitalist, white supremacist vision, they're going to go there. And if they do that, that is a reflection on the movement itself, not to denigrate the masses for making these decisions to survive in their day-to-day. And we do that too much right now. If people are not having the solidarity with Congo, Palestine, Haiti, with Sudan, with the Tigray, with different kinds of people, then it is a reflection on the political struggle at the time. The question that I will have is, what are you doing as a movement for your people right now? Not to just say, well, these people don't want, and then we must do what we want, etc., etc. No, what you want, honestly, is irrelevant. Because you ain't liberating nobody. It is the masses of people. It is us in movement. When Malcolm X says you cannot understand what's happening in the Mississippi unless you understand what's happening in the Congo. You have to understand what's happening in the Congo to be able to understand what's happening in the Mississippi. He's not just speaking. People like to quote Malcolm X, but then he built a movement that was grounded in the day-to-day realities of Black people struggling in the United States under white settler colonialism. It is not just he has pretty words that sound nice, that are good sound bites, and we can now just say these things today. He had been building on the blocks of Harlem, going to Black American urban centers, yes, through the Nation of Islam, yes, through a number of formations. That was the essence of his power. The Cuban solidarity with the global movement. Cuba can have solidarity because they won their revolution. They had a whole country that was now they had been building in the day-to-day realities of their people to actually now give the tangible material solidarity to movements fighting for freedom. Black American radicals are able to flee to Cuba, not because the Cubans are just such good people, etc., because Castro's movement had built something. If they had not built that thing, there ain't no way we going to Cuba. We just gonna get caught. If Batista is there, he gonna catch us. He gonna send us right back. So we must always remember that if we're talking about global solidarity, particularly with the African liberation movement, their perspective was you must liberate your people where they're at. You must be fighting for your people where you're at. Yes, we need to do global solidarity. Yes, make your statements, have your protests. For example, African Liberation Day is a very big event, begins in 1972, larger event in 1974, and around Rodney's, the anniversary of his passing has just been recently. So you'll see some of these speeches up on Instagram of Rodney making these speeches at the African Liberation Day protests and parades. These things are important, but in order to actually generate those amounts of people to be coming, you have to be building in your community. Right. We cannot just be saying that we want to have global solidarity just in the clouds, in the sky. You must be grounded on the local. Right? So I have about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to give an interesting example just from some of my mobilization work in the Bronx, New York, doing tenants work, right? People will think, some of these local things around tenants organization, there's no Pan-Africanism there. It's not true. Why? Because the Black working class in places like the Bronx is from the Pan-African world. Example, here I am trying to build in this building, right? And it's very tricky. Why? Because the Puerto Ricans don't want to mess with the Dominicans. The Puerto Rican, one lady is telling me, our building is dirty because it's Dominicans. These ones here are saying, it's these West Africans. This one is these Haitians. And this other ones, no, those ones from Ecuador that just moved in last week. These ones are just dirty people, boom, boom, boom. You know what? I said, listen, this building is dirty. We all live here, so we have to find a solution. In that building right there, you have a Pan-Africanist struggle happening. Pan-Africanism is a process. It is a movement. It is not an ideology divorced from material conditions. Even in our own individual, quote-unquote, African countries now, we do have to deal with tensions, not just on class, gender, race. We've got ethnic space. We have nation, religion, etc. It is a process of building that can start in a building like the Bronx. And having that solidarity in that building with people, understanding you're from Gambia. What's happening in Gambia? What's happening in Dominican Republic? Why do the Puerto Ricans think this about you? Why do these ones here slam the Puerto Ricans? Why are some of the Afro-Americans, Black Americans who've been there for a while actually very anti-immigrant in some places, right? Why are the Jamaicans moving in a particular way? What is happening in Jamaica? All of those things are locally grounded struggles that have international dimensions to them. And so part of the history of the liberation movement and the solidarity was to say, we have solidarity with you in the global struggle. Why? Because we believe we ourselves can relate directly to the feelings of racism and oppression that you have been dealing with. And from our own desire for liberation, where we stand in our countries, we want liberation for you too as well. And that is the nature of it. The local is indivisible from the global, and the global is tied to the local. But I do believe right now, in closing, we cannot forget the local struggle and cannot be denigrating our working class people who are trying to survive in a ridiculously oppressive economy that's gotten worse over time. That is a reflection of our own inability to build with them where they are at. And at times, to close off, it is okay to say we cannot have that global solidarity rally right now because we need to make sure our people are not homeless. Not saying the homeless can't fight for Palestine or Congo, but we have to address homelessness to be able to fight harder for Palestine, for Haiti, for Sudan and Tigray. And with that, I bring my comments to a close. Thank you all very much. I think I'm about 30 seconds over, but we're making progress. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Comrade Toivo. When you started speaking, I said they gave you the perfect topic because I know you're going to bring out truth on so many topics. You know, building locally is building Pan Africanism, and you know the importance of understanding the struggles that Black people are engaged in locally, and some of the limitations of being involved in things like coming out to a protest when your housing is precarious. So thank you so much for sharing, comrade. Appreciate you always. Um, so we're going to move over now to more discussion on global Black solidarity. Comrade Mishka Peters is going to speak about Winnie um, Madizikela Mandela's work. I probably said her name wrong. Mishka Peters is an honors graduate at the Department of History at the University of Western Cape, and former fellow of the Center of Humanities Research. So welcome, Comrade Mishka. I
Thank
hope I'm saying
you.
it correctly. Yes.
Yes, that's perfect, Mishka, Mishka. Yes, and I don't think Mamini would mind. So just to get started, I'm just going to set my timer as well. Thank you, everyone, for please. Thank you so much for allowing me to have some voice on this platform. So today I'm going to speak about the legacy of Winnie Mandela and what her work what really means for us right now, and how it can really motivate us and inspire us to think of strategies going forward. So I'm sure everyone is quite well acquainted with who Mam Winnie Mandela is, but just in case there are some who are not, just in 2 or 3 sentences, I'm just going to run through quickly. Zamo Winifred Zaniwe Madikizela was born in Bazana in Pondoland in 1936. At a young age, she moved to study social work in Johannesburg, where she meets South Africa's first democratic president, Mr. Nelson Mandela. And they wed and moved to Soweto in 1958, just 2 years before the 1960 Sharpeville massacre. So during this period, Nomzamo, as we affectionately know her as Mam Winnie, she becomes the first Black social medical worker. She sets off on a very charged social engagement during her work at Baragwanath Hospital. And then for the next 2 decades, she intensely works politically through organizing, through recruitment, through organizing meetings for the African National Congress up until 76, where the uprising that we commemorate today on June 16th. And, we think of the lives lost. It was due to this that the state had prompted a whole long list of allegations against her for the rallying work she did for the student protests, which had evolved into the uprising. So I want to look particularly at this time of exile right after 76. So from 76 to 84, she's exiled to a Free State small town called Bramford. And geographically, Bramford is so important because the state thought of it as being completely counterproductive to any sort of revolutionary work. It was on the lines of Aranya, which to this day is a demarcated white town where the society has felt that they would rather live separately. So she finds herself there. And why I feel this is so important, because looking at this time, it brings forward that there are so many aspects and tenants that need work and need attention simultaneously. So she sat in Bramford, and she is able to, at the same time, clandestinely rally for the ANC. She's able to set up a clinic facility. She's able to set up a food scheme, Operation Hunger. She's able to set up a sewing club, and she's able to facilitate kids that need to leave the small town to go to school. So, and all she is given is a small little concrete block And then she uses her networking capabilities to create these infrastructures, whilst keeping in mind that in the larger scheme, South Africa, or Southern Africa, in a sense, needs a complete infrastructural overhaul for the society to actually get anywhere. Now, I'm not taking for granted that she had access to avenues most of us don't, being the politically charged seat that she had, being Mandela's wife, and having the trajectory that she did. But what I think is important of this time and of her work is, one, she shows that there is no one path that's going to lead to emancipation. There's no one policy. There's no one window. There's no one strategy that is going to fix the vast ecologies that we have in our society today. People are being attacked from all angles: the medical, the mental, the social, the physical, etc., etc. And through setting up these various programs in a vicinity, using what she had, I feel is a great endeavor and a great philosophy to look to when thinking about strategies on the ground right now, in the community right now. Because what we have lives right now is that you wake up in little ice boxes, structures. Your walls have no insulation. You can only go outside if it's light, or you're going to get robbed, you're going to get worse. That ice box makes you sick. You get pushed into a healthcare system that is overwhelmed and under-resourced. If you manage to make it to places of higher education, there's an overwhelming realization, sitting in the halls with hundreds of other kids with a part-time job you're late for, that what is the point? You can work a 9 to 5, 60 hours, 40 hours a week. It's not going to change the kilometers of shacklands that you pass, that you have to navigate through to get to your campus. Working wholeheartedly, going to every lecture, it's not in your reality that you can see. It's not going to change that. And I think that that's why a lot of young people and a lot of people are extremely angry right now. The realities that are visible to you, or the future opportunities that you see as options, do not carry the power to change that icebox that you can imagine. And I think Mamini understood that very clearly, that what had become normal day-to-day living was a perpetual trap to continue the system of oppression. And I believe if we follow the lines of, in BCM, it's the Black community programs, but I just feel that these internal structures, and allow that philosophy to bleed through what we activate now, we can create subversive terrains within this trap that would have the ability to lessen the stronghold, even if it's gradually. And what I mean by this is placing informal structures of healing and learning of what we are able to within the centers of under-resourced and neglected communities. Because just as there is no one good answer, there is no external plan that's going to fix the innards of the township. And I agree wholeheartedly with Comtoevo. It has to come from the inside. And the intellectual capacity, the history of knowledge production in that space has to be placed at the forefront of challenges overcome, to be overcome. Because we cannot offer change if you don't explain why. The regimes have been extremely efficient in molding discriminative minds, and this has to be undone if we hope to reach the snowball that will lead us out of this space. Even to lessen the stronghold subtly and slowly is to lessen it eventually, right? But I also feel from how we saw her life and her legacy unfold, we should also remember and to embed in our thinking that the pitfalls of valorization is incredibly real. And to face the truth of it, being isolated and alienated during exile and during her political life caused Mamini great pain. We do not have to deal with those grounds. We can work collectively and build structures together, and not towers, and close them up and surveil them from the outside in. The heterocentric narrative is more often than not a media-mounted tool of distraction, or the method of a careerist. And what I feel we should take is that we do not need to embody the identity, but to learn from our ancestors, to look at what they did, what happened, how it was resoluted, and to strategize our own from that. Mamwini's type of organizational leadership would be extremely useful right now. The ability to handle multiple projects simultaneously, to activate clandestine underground navigational circuits, to reach objectives during the night or during the underground times, and then on the daytime work through community projects. Having this fluidity and having this realization that there's no one route. You can't just focus on one thing and think that it's going to enact change. It has to come through many aspects to cover the vast aspects of our lives that have been oppressed, and it has to come from inside the community. And this has many sort of pros and cons. You know, I think what is very important to hold in to remembrance that yes, her leadership abilities and organizational abilities are very important. But by focusing and putting on a pedestal one person, it negates and buries the memories of so many others. And I can name a few. There's Dalshi September with the National Liberation Front and the works that she did. There's Ruth First. There's Dorothy Masuka and her fearless direction of her lyrics. There's Tandika Zonto, who Toivo interviews in his book. You know, and not only does it bury these memories, but it is toxic in the sense that people lose faith of their own worth, of their own value, if they can't reach the epitome of what the pedestal has been placed. Right? So is to keep all of these things in mind as we are going forward, is to keep this historical reflection, but not get stuck in it, to realize that there's work that needs to be done right now. And this work right now might look different to the work that was done then. Back then, there was a clear non-collaborative stance. There's no way that a Black Liberation Front could hold hands with the apartheid regime and say we can work together despite what actually went down. I feel that, you know, at that time in the 70s, you could not say that righteously with a strong political consciousness that is the right thing to do. But right now, where we're sitting in seats where we don't have access to resources, we don't have access to the capital, where our economy and our lives have been structured in such a way where capital literally fuels so many programs and so many projects that needs to be done on the ground. Is the answer now is to look at it and say, maybe we set one foot in, one foot out. Maybe, you know, it's the same places of systemic institutionalized injustice which allow resources to flow to make these conferences, to make these talks. So maybe we use those resources and we strategize and plan so that we can use it in a method where we reach to an objective where we no longer need to. Right? Where it becomes a cycle of self-reliance. But right now we have to think realistically, how can we get that going? How can we start these communities? How can we start healing and fixing from the inside? And how do we build the structures? Where do we get the resources? Yeah, so I would end on just with two queries that I've been dealing with and that I've been asking a lot, and I just want to really hear people, is this the way? Is creating systems of subterfuge which create terrains within the systems that can siphon into ethical cycles of some sort of reparations or some sort of healing? Is that where we are? Because on the forefront, I am so charged and I'm so energized for a complete revolution, but at the same time, I got my family. I can't exactly lose my economic standing right now because then so much people that rely on me will fall. So is this the safe route? And then another query is, how do sustainable community projects withstand the obstructions that we face in the society? When there's war, when there's what's happening in Palestine, where you can know that where the locale where your organization is, where the kids are, where the animals are that you're trying to help, you no longer have access. Right? Okay, I have 2 minutes left, but I will leave that to Q&A. Thank you so much, guys.
Mishka, for that elaborate presentation. We are now going to move to the other side of the continent. So we're going to Ghana, we're going to Accra, and we're going to listen to Bontwi Anyete. But before that, please let us know what you're thinking. Share your comments, share your questions if you have any in the chat at whichever platform you're watching us from, whether Twitter or X now, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. We want to be able to engage, but also, we know there is a lot of knowledge out there as well. This shouldn't be a one-way street. So I'm going to introduce Bontwi Anyete. Bontwi Anyete has been a fighter for approaching 2 years. And by fighter, this means a member of the Economic Fighters League, the social political movement in Ghana. He has been a Pan-Africanist for 15 years. His journey to activism was essentially started by a book by Senegalese historian Cheikh Anta Diop. So he's always had utmost respect for the role of education in the necessary radicalization of Africans. How to make sure we collect the education we give ourselves so that it goes hand in hand with inspired action is his passion. A revolution is inevitable in Africa, and making sure as many of those on the front line are correctly conscientized is a necessary balance, because as Thomas Sankara said, a soldier without any political or ideological training is a potential criminal. Bontwi is honored to be part of the Fighters Education Bureau, and he's honored to join us as well, but he's very humble. He's not telling us that he's the commander in charge of education at Economic Fighters League, because that's the vocabulary that the league uses for its officers and comrades. Welcome, Bontwi. Take it away and tell us about what Kwame Nkrumah would do today if he were president of Ghana. What would Nkrumah's foreign policy look like on the question of Haiti today? Thank you.
Hello, we can't hear you. I don't know if you are muted.
I was
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, we're
connectivity
trying to
problems,
chat
and
to you.
I'm
Yeah,
informed
you
that
have to.
there actually has been.
Can you start
So I've
again?
unplugged my earphones. I think that was probably what was causing the issue. So let me
Okay,
start
okay.
again. My name is Bontwi Anyete of the Economic Fighters League. Greetings, morning, afternoon, or evening greetings, wherever you are in the world, and indeed, whenever you are listening to this submission. I was thanking my fellow scholars who went ahead of me.
It seems we're having some challenges with the connection. In the meantime, we're going. I'm going to say a little bit more on the type of work that Economic Fighters League has been doing. Fighters have been, as a political party, but also that combines both political party attributes and social movement attributes, looking towards re-engineering a revolutionary sentiment within Ghana. Born to your back.
Yes, apologies. Massive internet issues here, but I hope you can hear me and see me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so to get into the theme of the conversation, I was very much looking forward to how my comrades and fellow scholars would navigate the topic of this word betrayal, because there is an argument to say that no betrayal has taken place. A popular definition of the word betrayal is to betray one's country, group, or persons. As many of our fellow colleagues and comrades and scholars have said today here, those that are in charge of, unfortunately, the machinery of our nation states are arguably not members of our countries, ignoring also the fact, or also bringing also the fact that states that are not of our making. So when we talk about the word betrayal, and without getting too semantic about it, we have to be careful about assessing if those that are betraying us feel any kind of kinship with the country, and saying when we use the word fail, because that one presupposes that somebody's objective is Africans' interests. And so when Africans' interests are not being met, they are failing or they have betrayed their objective, when that has not. So it's very important, as some of my comrades have spoken about, that we continue to organize and take over, whether from a micro level or a macro level, the power bases in our nations and in our communities, so that we can achieve these goals. Speaking specifically from the Ghana context, very much so in Ghana, the political class are the enemy. Much of what they do, if not all, is criminal in nature and very much allied to white monopoly capital, specifically against African interests. So I would argue that the word traitor is too good for them. Right now, the current president of Ghana, Akufo-Addo, his spiritual uncle, K.A. Buzia, was anti-independence, writing a famous letter to what was then the Manchester Guardian. I should say he wrote it to them. He CC'd the Manchester Guardian in a letter to British royalty, asking that they deny Ghana's independence, or what then would have been the Gold Coast. The current president's actual uncle was a CIA asset, who, in conversation with the great African-American scholar Richard Wright, said that, quote, I want to get this exact quote, where he said that it was emotional to try and speak to the interests of what was at the time the Ghanaian masses, and that he only sees individuals, not the masses. So that speaks to what his beliefs were even before he was exposed as a CIA asset. And the president, speaking about the current president again, his actual great grandparents has ancestry of slavers. So he comes from a long line of people that have never had the interests of fellow Africans in mind. And how we then think about those who are of the political class, whether they are traitors or whether they are people who are designed to be our enemies, then affects how we conduct ourselves in the battle against them. But then let's get to the topic of the African personality that Nkrumah spoke about. And it's something that is, debated quite a lot. If in the final analysis we think of the African personality, meaning that to be African by default, to be born on the continent, to be born of African heritage, means that you're of this personality. That means if you do not speak to African interest, you are automatically a traitor. That then changes how we look at that conversation and that word, once again, betrayal. But it's a conversation that we need to have and that we cannot assume, because on a military science level, on a political science level, it affects and possibly compromises how we fight, if we think that we're fighting traitors, or if we think that we're fighting people who are actually performing their objective, which is to go against the interest of the African masses. So as I said, the subject of Nkrumah's African personality that he spoke of is very much often debated, very often in conjunction with other African ideals and frameworks of revolution. Socialism, negritude, African socialism, famously spoken of by his comrade in Tanzania, Nyerere, and then Blackism and Black Power. But yes, so I very much encourage all those participating here to look up, first of all, in Nkrumah's own words on the African personality, and then the words of scholars and commentators that have come after on this subject. I would argue that it's ideology based on not only just the equality, call it the Ubuntu, of not only Ghanaians at the time, but of Africans across the African world, in the diaspora, in the Caribbean, and elsewhere on the continent, but also an interrelatedness, a cooperation that comes out of that connection, not just a superficial connection. And we have other commentators who, in your research, you would come across. Kofi Otobam spoke of the African personality, centered it generally around the actual traits and responses common to Africans. Then in the Beligi Sitol, or Sitoli, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, he spoke of the African personality, interpreted it around identity of Africans. And then the scholar who I'm actually going to quote from shortly, he spoke around African personality, as Nkrumah used it, around making a case for the knowledge of African history, and this knowledge of African history being a catalyst, in how today Africans see themselves and in much of the revolutionary struggles. So I want to quote from a work right now of F.I. Ogunmodede, who spoke around the African history piece, speaking around Nkrumah's use of this term African personality and I guess the origins of it. He too starts with a quote from another scholar. It goes like this. Sorry. According to Professor Patrick Akwe, the term African personality was introduced into African politics by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, when as the president of Ghana and a leading politician in Africa, he was looking for a guiding ideology for African socialism. For Nkrumah, then, the term meant the rallying point of all African peoples and Africans and countries under one banner and forum, and they're speaking together in one concerted voice for the realization of Africa's political freedom and economic development. Also, while preparing Ghana for the Conference of Independent African States held in Accra on April 15th, 1958. He further stated the ideological orientation he gives to African personality. This is Nkrumah's own words now. For too long in our history, Africa has spoken through the voices of others. Now, what I have called an African personality in international affairs will have a chance of making its proper impact and let the world know it through the voices of Nkrumah's own sons, and I would add daughters. So here Nkrumah is talking very much about the collective interest. Nkrumah was very aware of the cultural nuances of his fellow Africans and never, hold on. assumed and taken on the continent as a monolith. Even within his navigating of the ethnicities of Ghana, he understood the variety and color within us, but understanding that certainly our interests are very much one and the same around health, around economic freedom, and such things like that. So where we're then talking to take Nkrumah's interpretation, and especially also looking at the context of the fact that he was speaking this before a conference where he was inviting not only independent African nations, but also African nations that were still working their way to independence, by which action he made himself an enemy of many of the European countries that would have seen him as quite harmless if he had only paused his actions at the independence of Ghana. So then we ask the question then, with this conference and this use of the term African personality, what would Nkrumah have done? With this term around African personality and me talking about the fact that it's been very much debated, it can be very much mistaken for something that was more intellectual and academic in nature. But with Nkrumah, every idea he spoke of, he was always able to show how he was working and his methodology to be able to shore up whatever idea he was speaking about. So we can see with his dealings with the diaspora what he would have done. Maya Angelou, who was in Ghana during Nkrumah's reign, and taught at University of Ghana. Malcolm X, when he visited, also spoke at the University of Ghana, and he pioneered many of the projects we hear today around inviting the diaspora to come to Ghana and to relate to Ghana, not in any superficial way, not in any strictly social, strictly cultural way, but to add always the political and economic dimension. Many of the things that took place around the Nkrumah's illegal overthrow showed how much he was doing in and around conversations with the diaspora and that dialogue with the diaspora. Many of the camps that were being created were removed at the time of his overthrow, which was housing many people from across the continent, many Zimbabweans, basically every kind of continental African was deported by the American-sponsored coup operators and criminals. We know that the likes of Amilcar Cabral came to visit and learned from Nkrumah here in Ghana, and then later while he was in exile in Guinea. Same with Patrice Lumumba. In fact, there's evidence of a compact between them that Ghana and Congo would unite, with the power base being in the Congo. Nkrumah once again seeing what once many around him couldn't see. And in many ways, Haiti is the Congo of the diaspora, so rich in resources, being a case study for so many Africans in the importance of revolution, as well as the richness of resources. So Nkrumah showed in his time exactly the waymarks that he would have set, the milestones we should set for ourselves today in how he dealt with fellow African nations, and how today we should be dealing with our Africans, our fellow Africans in the diaspora. It wasn't just only the diaspora that he had these strong dealings with and always was dealing with people economically and politically, but even in some small examples, there's an institution called Ghana House that was in Britain, which was designed to host Ghanaian students whilst in Britain. This would have prevented their need to work for rent. They would have learned what they needed to learn and be able to return. For many today, we can imagine what the power of that would have been. We know that so many people who plan to travel just to study and then return end up being caught in the tendrils of white monopoly capital and being lost to the continent and being part of this famous brain drain. But Nkrumah, in his own way, was also trying to prevent once again in advance the brain drain that really only got really bad after his illegal overthrow and the way those criminals basically sacked the Ghanaian economy. So the conversation, I'm not sure how much time I have left, but yeah, the conversation around
I don't know what happened there. We just lost Bontwi, but he was also moving towards concluding. We're going to now, and that was an elaborate, in-depth understanding, exposition on Kwame Nkrumah's politics and philosophy. We now want to move to the present and want to go to East Africa. Our next speaker is based in Tanzania and is going to tell us about people-led activism and solidarity movements in international affairs. But I want to, before I introduce him, I want to remind you to pitch in with your comments, pitch in with your feedback. We're going, after the next speaker, we're going to come back to the speakers and ask them questions. So send those questions in the chat, and then we will pose them to the speakers. Some of you who have already asked your questions, we will read them out at that time. So let me introduce Celestine. Celestine Matovu has completed a BA in History and Political Science and is currently pursuing an MA in Peace and Strategic Studies at the University of Jerusalem. Celestine is going to, as I've said, is going to take us through East African popular solidarity movements and the ways in which they are doing what, as this conversation is framed, the states are no longer doing. Take it away, Celestine.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, on the pertaining the topic that the example of solidarity movement in East Africa, there's bears of them. There isn't, I can say there isn't a coordinated platform for these movements. Though you can feel amongst the people, the populace, that they are certain the feelings of the populace. They are joined with the people fighting for liberations. When you look at various forums, when you look at social media, let's say comments, when you look at in education institutions, the discussions, they pretend that the people, they wish for their states and their governments to be a front as in the 20th century. So I would say that in East Africa, most of these nation level, so you had the leaders who led the people. For instance, you had, for instance, in my country, Tanzania, Mwalimu Nyerere spearheaded these movements, and the liberation movements were actually hoisted in Tanzania. But the people, Tanzanians, for instance, were very vocal in solidarity with other peoples who are fighting for the independence. But when the state was somehow swept away, coming the introduction of the STAPs in the late 20th century, you had the state evaporating, and some of the people, the coordinated effort which was somehow cemented by the state, also eroded. So the movement was somehow also relaxed and relapsed. Yes. So say that solidarity movement, which are literally tied to the state and government-led levels, have been relegated to university corridors in regional countries or civil social groups. So they are, when Comrade Mosige told me that I should present on this topic, it somehow made me realize that there is a scarcity of this solidarity movement. So you had to really dig deep to see where are the movements. And if we are talking about the Caribbean region, in Haiti, let's say, for instance, I can argue that the umbilical cord has been cut. So you see that solidarity movements are more leaning towards the Palestinian movement, you can say, or in Congo, but there is a vacuum in solidarity movement between the Caribbean and in East African region. Eh? And if you factor that Haiti has been in the struggle for independence, Haiti was a sound supporter for actually led the torch for the independence of African country. Factoring that Haiti was actually the first country of African origin of the blacks, which was in the UN and was a vocal supporter for African independence. So to see this vacuum, which that the moment these African states got the independences, they digged in deep in the connection between the Caribbean, Haiti, and these new states, or somehow cut immediately after these nation states got the independences. So I think that this betrayal or the roads, not betrayal per se, the turning back of these states to Haiti were cemented when these countries got the independences and somehow became concerned with African with entities or polities inside Africa, and this can be manifested in certain instances. For instance, Haiti up to now isn't despite being African and being with a black populace, in principle it's supposed to be a member of the AU, but this was cut. The current AU relegated Haiti to an observer status instead of joining directly with the Haitians, factoring that the Haitians once played part in the independences of these African states in 1945 in the UN. So you can see that the umbilical cord and the betrayal, not betrayal, but the cut of relations was cemented in the 1960s when this country started to fight for the independence. Other than that, I had to dig now to see where in these spaces now, where the state, I've told you, the state is no longer concerned with solidarity movements. The state is now neoliberal, captured, eroded the power of the states, and the people were left wondering. So these struggles were relegated either into education institutions such as university, which themselves also it remains in singular faculties, or you say maybe certain lecturers who are still involved in Pan-Africanism and solidarity movement, or in social groupings which themselves are still not connected per se. So you find, let's say in East Africa, you see the movements. You find a movement based in Tanzania, and in Tanzania it's based in a regional capacity, not in a national capacity. Same with Kenya, same with Uganda, or Rwanda and Burundi. So far, I had I had several movements which are somehow still active, and they still show support in the solidarity movements per se. The first one I would put it on the social level. There are several groups based in Tanzania. For instance, there's the Uwamama, which is the ushirika wa wanawake wa federation umanzesi. It's a socialist movement which it's made by women. This Uwamama based in Tanzania showed support in the recent International Women's Day. Showed support with the women who are facing scourges of imperialism in DRC and Palestine. So you can see that Haiti or the Caribbean is somehow forgotten in this struggle. So even in this solidarity movement, which somehow it's anti-colonial and anti-imperialist, still is based on intra-regional and somehow forgotten Haiti. The other front, which apart from Uwamama, the other one is called Julawata, or Sauti ya Ujamaa. This is also a socialist platform, which is also in principle anti-imperialist, and it's a solidarity movement. So These institutions I mentioned right here, they have got their social media. They've got their social media handles and they like certain publications you can visit them based in Tanzania. So that's even on a social platform, on an intellectual platform, or in the educational platform or universities. I can cite the one based in my university, University of Dar es Salaam, which is called the Mwalimu Nyerere Professorial Chair in Pan-African Studies. This is basically a platform which, at least in this vacuum of solidarity, at least it brings together students and like-minded academicians to discuss Pan-Africanism, which is somehow in this generation of ours, certain things are seen as shibboleths, or they don't capture the people. So things like Pan-Africanism are seen that they are old fashioned, but this platform at least brings together students and brings together mentors. It's called the Mwalimu Nyerere Professorial Chair in Pan-African Studies. Okay, looking on the political platform, so far I've mentioned that the solidarity movement have been based in social civil movements such as Wamama and Jurawata. Also on the educational or platform, I've mentioned this professorial chair, which is in the University of Dar es Salaam. Also in Kenya, an East African country, there is this party which someone now touched on, the Haiti, was very vocal about Kenyan mission in Haiti. It's called the Communist Party of Kenya. This was somehow very vocal in condemning what Kenya is brandly doing. It's a proxy, you can say. Yeah? It's very bad for an African country going to a black country and catering for the machinations of imperialists. So I had these groups which at least keep on showing that the solidarity movements are there. So I would say that the coordinated movements in East Africa, there is a vacuum. To be honest, there's a vacuum. These things are not so much coordinated. So you can find there's splatters here and there, but there is no coordinated movement. And platforms like this, at least I can say that it can be a connection, or we can revitalize these dialogues between the Caribbean, Haiti, and the East African region. That's what I can say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celestine, for that brief but comprehensive still summary of the state of affairs in popular solidarity movements in Eastern Africa. We are going to move towards a Q&A, and I'm going to call on my colleague Nanri to lead us in this section.
And I really, for the audience, I think Comrade Crystal is going to bring everybody into the Q&A. And while we are doing that, if you have questions, comments, please put them in the chat. We would love to hear from you, whether you're on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube. We are very excited to hear and have your participation in this discussion. So while we're waiting for people to make some comments, I'll just ask a few questions, and the guests can feel free to answer as they see fit. So if there's people, I just want to point to, if there's people in the audience who kind of want to engage but feel that they maybe don't have the knowledge, or they don't have the group in their community that they're very engaged in, and they want to be engaged more in Pan-African activism and organizing, I would just love for people to speak because I know there's a lot of great organizations here. Um, how to maybe advise young organizers on how to start creating and working towards building more Pan-Africanism around the issues, that are happening in Haiti right now. And I don't know if Comrade Mamira would like to start, but really thinking about what are practical ways we can amplify these issues. And, next week, actually, we're going to have a session on Palestine. And I know that here, I'm based in Montreal, Quebec. And I know a lot of times people here are like, oh, why is the issue so much focused on these regions and not focused on these regions? And I think the conversation here today has really highlighted some of the deep history around these conflicts and how they have been framed in such ways that kind of prohibit ways in which young people can gain knowledge. So yeah, I just wanted you all to speak to practical ways that young people can become engaged in organizing, and maybe first steps that they can take towards building up their Pan-Africanism as as young organizers. Thank you.
That's always the tough question to answer is the what's next. So I just wanted to lift up something that Toivo said earlier about working locally, right? That the way in the belly of the beast to be able to impact other parts that, where we're directly from or in solidarity with through this Pan-African lens specifically, right, that it requires the work inside of the belly of the beast, so where we are located, and not just in relation to, in my case, Haiti, where I'm from, but also embedding myself in struggles here in the United States, whether it's, unionizing work or whether it's other issues like police brutality and the eventual abolishing of the police, right? Like that, all these works are part of a general Pan-African struggle that we can engage in. So that would be one of the first things that I would want to say. And relatedly, of course, in terms of how it could impact Haiti, there are a few Haitian American activists in Florida right now organizing, some kind of a campaign for gun control. A lot of the guns coming into Haiti are coming through, obviously, Florida, right? So thinking about the ways that specific places where you are located in the belly of the beast do have these immediate connections to what's happening elsewhere. I would say, stop Cop City campaigns. There are 47 cities that are planning to build these cop cities, and essentially it's to practice, fine tuning warfare against us inside the United States, right? So for me, these are like sort of key issues that within the United States, specifically, those of us who are Pan Africanists need to be working around, that is directly in relation and impacts the work that we want to see done elsewhere. So that would be just some of the things that I, offer here.
Thanks, comrade. And I think the weapons flow is such a big issue that is oftentimes missed. How guns in one part of the world are also affecting, the export into other countries, and how this is, it needs to be reflected in both our local organizing and our international Pan-Africanist organizing as well. I don't know if anyone else would like to respond to that question. You can just unmute.
Afternoon. I hope you can all hear me. A really important question, that part about what happens next. Speaking about Ghana, I think we have this legacy of Pan-Africanism and resistance. It means I'm able to tell people who ask me that question here, from where you start from where you are, start from your interests. if you're, you can go straight in and join organizations like mine, Economic Fighters League, which is very much about agitating against the actions of, the political class. Or you can start the resistance from your area of interest. We've got organizations in Ghana like Food Sovereignty Ghana, which is about literally the subject of food sovereignty, and all of that. So you've got organizations which, if you start from your area of interest, and you could find the imperialism there, with Food Sovereignty Ghana specifically, you've got when Thomas Sankara said, if you want to understand imperialism, look on your plate. That is still very much the case today. And so you can find imperialism on your plates, in the clothes you wear. There's a lot of ways that you can get organized based off of your interest, your area of study, your career, and so forth. But whatever it is, you must join an organization and be about finding how the interests of the masses must be served by whichever organization you're working with.
Maybe if I could jump in, can you guys hear me? You guys can, okay, cool. So I'm outside at the restaurant. Sorry, it's dark out here, so etc. But no, I mean, really, the major thing I would give to newer organizers, regardless of age, and it's one of my own pet peeves myself. Again, even myself, scholar activist as I am, you are enough. You understand? And I think the problem is that what ends up happening sometimes, we go back to the Malcolm X's, the Nkrumahs, the Hueys, right? The Angela Davises, the Winnie Madikizela Mandela. We keep on going back to these people, and it's good. We must understand who they are. We must have a sense of some of this history. But the reality is, there were no guidebooks for these people. They had to go and struggle. And they effed up a lot. All of them, every single one. Nkrumah, Winnie, everybody. There's no exceptions. We are still dealing with some of their problems now in the Pan-Africanist movement. And the problem I'm finding with a lot of our younger activists, they feel insufficient. They feel that they are not actively, that they're not enough. They feel that they should be doing more. And that feeling of despair, which is what capitalism now seems to be utilizing as a means to pacify resistance or to make it hard to coordinate, is that the younger folks are now feeling, well, I haven't read all of Kwame Nkrumah's readings. Now apparently I can't be a Pan-Africanist. That is rubbish, right? Nkrumah does not, we actually right now probably even have more tools than Nkrumah ever did have before. And Nkrumah himself did not come from a vacuum. Nkrumah himself is shaped from a time of struggle. I keep on telling people right now, Nkrumah, Ella Baker, Gloria Richardson, Dessalines, Ida B. Wells, there's no time machine where they're coming through that door. They are dead. Now, we love them. Their memory is alive, and we utilize and we carry on their struggle, but we have to find our own answers and our own mistakes. And I think for some of us who have some of this knowledge, particularly the older generation that's been doing this for 20 and 30 years, y'all need to back the F up and allow the mistakes to come through, which you yourself have made. And some of us who understand some of these histories, I can pick some of you all who've made these mistakes and have messed things up, and you had to learn. A younger generation needs a chance to figure their own shit out, and yes, to have to face the consequences of decisions that they have made. That's how people learn. People don't learn because they studied Nkrumah and CLR James for 10 hours each day, right? You actually have to go out and build these things. You feel me? And so I think that's where I would like to say with some of the younger folks is you are enough. Part of what colonialism, its master plan is to make you feel insufficient, is to make you feel that you are not enough for your own people's liberation, that now you need to have the free market or you need to have the DA. Again, we're here in Tanzania with the ANC now openly in an alliance with the DA and the IFP, people who they were fighting and in the streets having bloody combat with in the 1980s. Now they're friends. So the thing is that they are enough. Colonialism says you are not enough. It says you need them to survive. You need them even to be somebody. And we're saying, no, you are your somebody because you have come from a legacy of struggle built by people like Nkrumah, built from people like Ella Baker, built from people like Cecile Fatima, built from people, we can keep on going, right? Chris Hane, Biko, whatever you want to say, right? You come from something. And that is what I would like to see us maybe more look at, is to show people you have come from something, hence you will find the answers of your time. Kwame Nkrumah, I'm sorry, he will have no answers for our time right now because he's not from this time. It doesn't mean we can't utilize him. It doesn't mean that the man is not. Listen, I used to have his book so much in college. My girlfriend said, "Am I dating you or am I dating Africa Must Unite?" You know what I'm saying? Now, of course, I would say you're dating all of it. You know what I mean? But the reality is that, like, I love the man, right? But the question is that he himself will not give answers right now. We have to find the answers right now. As Mishka was saying, in the townships, they must find the answers. It won't come from trickle-down economics. It won't come from an ANC, DA, IFP alliance, and it won't come from an abstract understanding of Black consciousness. Black consciousness is a living reality in the day-to-day lives of our people that comes from hundreds of years of global Black struggle. It isn't just a unique thing at one moment in time. That's more of what I think I would like a newer generation to understand, is you are enough. You have the tools. You have everything that you need. You don't need anything else but what you already have. Now, of course, you can get help. Of course, you can have guidance. Of course, we're going to make our mistakes. Of course, you need to have a sense of who's come. No doubt about that. But the essential point is you have the tools that you need, and liberation will come with us or not at all.
Thank you so much, Comrade Toivo, for that passionate response. I am also curious as we think of the future, as we think of, everything that we have said so far. I am curious as to where you think the role of the state in a future Africa is. Is it time to admit or consider that perhaps the state cannot be a vehicle for our freedom dreams? Perhaps we need to figure out alternative ways of working together, of supporting one another, as opposed to taking over the states. How, is it possible to compare examples of progressives and see if indeed this is a tool that can be redeemed to serve our interests as people of African descent? I'm also asking this question in the context of the Kenyan response. So there was a case put in court to challenge the constitutionality of the mission by Kenyan civil society actors. So on one hand, the Kenyan state, led by President Ruto, is pushing to get money and other reasons to go into Haiti. But the Kenyan people, through at least this case, are challenging that action. So is the state inherently an anti-Black, anti-African institution, and therefore impossible to ever work for us? And also thinking about the African Union, which is a state-oriented institution, which of course started as the Organization of African Unity, but even if it was based on states, it was states that were in a decolonizing moment. So then the Organization of African Unity's mission in some way differs from the mission of the African Union. So where do you see the African Union and states generally in this situation? And is it feasible for us to work outside that structure, to show solidarity with one another and perhaps figure out other ways of being? I know I've gone on with the question, but I will let whoever wants to take a stab first go, and then we do a round, everybody responds, and then we come back. Yes, Celestine.
Yes, on my side, I would say that the state is indispensable, judging from past, from the historicity of things. If we have these solidarities in tuned to the state level, most of things can be possible. For instance, let me point out, for instance, in Tanzania, we had comrades from South Africa using the Tanzanian passport in their solidarity movements. So I would say that we at least through these movements, through the intellectual base or social movements, the state it's the key in at least in trying to swim in this the international community, how it's headed right now. We should have a state at the to spearhead these movements. So, for instance, the mission in Haiti, it has its legitimacy because the state power such as Kenya have legitimized it, and the state of Kenya, for instance, is going to produce resources and whatnot. So, even to us, we should at least not pray. We should at least build it. We should at least try to coerce and have a state of our own. Let's say, for instance, whatever it is, so that we can somehow spearhead these movements. For instance, to navigate in this world of today, there is maybe the issues of passports, the issues of hosting, let's say, bases for training and whatnot. So the state is indispensable. So we can talk about things, but the state is indispensable. Judging from a realist point of view, that's my point. Though this is it's not to diminish the relations between under the state, but I would say that the state is important. It's important.
Thank you so much, Celestine. Who wants to? Yes, Mishka? Yes, Mishka.
I would just point out that just like from a historical thinking, that we would need a complete restructuring of what defines a state, because as far as I know, the state has been a mechanism that was imparted for the rule over and oppressed sort of people, and it was structured in this way and weaponized in this way for capitalist output. So I would say, firstly, because there's the problem of the nation borders as it is being sort of a control and surveillance system with a disregard for a lot of disenfranchised communities and villages. So I would start with a restructuring of what we think of the state, and what would a state look like that actually works for Black people and for marginalized communities, what that actually looks like, and then look at how that can be mechanized towards a brighter future for all. Thanks. Oops.
Comrade Besije.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. We cannot ignore the neocolonial state, but we need to understand where it comes from. The state, the international system comes out of the Westphalian agreement, when European states fought and got tired of fighting amongst themselves and decided that they needed to put mechanisms in place to ensure stability and coordination in their imperialist activities. So what we need to do is to either, if we are able to transform the neocolonial state, we transform it, but we must work towards dismantling it if it cannot be, if it is too deformed to be transformed. Obviously, this is not a question of either or, zero-sum game. It's important for progressives, for radicals, for Pan-Africanists to actually work towards capturing this state, because even the process of transforming it or dismantling it would mean being in charge. We cannot just say, okay, let's choose to just create grassroots movements and forget about the state, because the state is going to repress you, make it impossible for you to work. So we need to understand and try to change the dynamics of how things have been. I would give the example of Tanzania. The reason why Tanzania served as a perfect base for the liberation movements is because it had a leadership that understood the dynamics, the kinds of institutions that the colonial state left in place. Kwame Nkrumah tried to do so many things, and he was overthrown by his own army. In Tanzania, when the Tanzanian army, the Tanganyika tried to have an insurrection, what happened was that Nyerere very wisely called on the Commonwealth and said, come intervene. Our army is becoming unruly. So what they did in Tanzania was to actually dismantle the colonial army. They dismantled it completely, sent them home, and recruited a new army when I was giving my presentation, I said something about how Kikwete promised to the US ambassador that he was going to fire or retire the generals who were resisting cooperating with AFRICOM. The reason why the Tanzanian army up to now still has those liberation credentials is because they were specifically established as an army of African liberation. So we cannot ignore the state, we must deal with it, but we need to transform or dismantle it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Vukwani. I want to ask one more question, and then
Can I get a chance at that question, please? I wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Yes,
This was
thank
actually.
you.
Go ahead. Go on.
Yes. So, yes, we need a vehicle through which we can collectively, those of us existing on a given territory, interchange with the global system. As Mishka says, should it be the state, and how, as Vukwani is also pointing out, it has always been wielded by a small group of privileged people, right? And in our cases, the neo-colonial state is a way for the imperialists to continue to organize the space, right? So of course, if that's the state, certainly we can just throw it out, right? And in its form in Haiti, it gives you this presidential council with 7 presidents, and I'll say, right, 7 dudes. But when we look at the north of Haiti, where last year, a coalition of peasant organizations essentially started to build a canal on the Massacre River. It's called at the border of Haiti and Dominican Republic, in order to irrigate 5,000 hectares of land that would produce up to 10% of the rice that Haiti itself could consume. Haiti's importing like 80% of its rice, right, from the United States, from the Dominican Republic, right? What would it mean for Haiti to be able to produce its own food? This is, right, the measurement of sovereignty, capacity to produce your own food. So, right, they build this canal, and what do we see in the canal project? Women at every level of the work, from the construction, laying down the bricks, the engineers, the people cooking the food, making sure that workers are getting fed, the people who came and, artists who brought themselves and their musical talents and to be able to keep pumping out what we call in Haiti the combit, the coming together in exchange of labor for free towards a communal project. And when we see the state, if we will, this thing that represents a collective will, right? The capacity for us to really, put in a container what we call self-determination is being enacted without the dirty politicians, without the blackface, sellouts. We don't have a whole bunch of a panel of dudes who are presidents who are like ready to cut their piece of the pie to share the power. We have, right, popular participation that includes 52% of the population, which are women at every level of the work. So for me, like, these are signs of the kind of state making that needs to be, built up, right, from the bottom up. So I know we're caught in the language of using the state, and we don't, always mean the same thing, right? Because we, even though, I lean anarchist, doesn't mean that there is not an entity that is responsible for managing the thing, right? Society, collectivities. So that's the thing I would like to offer, even though, I started out talking about the gang violence in Haiti. There are these other efforts that brought thousands of people to this border, to this project together, that should be lifted up, as examples of alternative state making.
Absolutely. And, the classic idea that anarchy does not necessarily mean chaos, that, it's a different way of being organized. But I wanted to ask you a more practical question. So from, and we need to take advantage of you being the only Haitian here. What do you think organizers, activists from the continent, Africa or other places can do right now in the crisis or in the situation in Haiti? What sort of solidarity is needed at this point? What would be helpful? What are the more practical, tangible things that can be done?
Yeah, I mean, again, always a great question. And I'll say some of the work we're doing here and exchanging the information is already the first thing, right? Bringing analysis. It would be ideal to have more people in Haiti speaking, but right, that requires language, translation, justice, right? Which is a great feat. I've tried to do that. It costs money unless we have like, you know, a bunch of volunteers like doing the work. But absolutely lifting up what's on the ground. And this is what I try to do, but it's not enough, right? So like, how do we amplify and multiply the platforms to give Haitians in Haiti, whether they're radical or progressive? And there are several groups, you know, I can point to folks who want to learn more. Not everybody's, you know, social media handle, you know, some groups are not operating in that digital space in the same way, right? They don't have the kind of commitment for the branding that some, you know, shiny NGO organizations have, right? So if we're looking to find them in those places, they will be missing, right? So this is why I try to create, you know, either come as the bridge with the message or create, you know, translated panels, at least for the information and the perspectives to come out. Because often if the international news is not on gang violence, then everybody's asking, what is Famila Valas and Agistide doing? And then that's the full picture of the thing. And we sort of miss what's on the ground, and other voices that are also positioning differently. And so that's basically the first thing. You know, there are certain groups, like I said, Nupab Domi, which is, you know, a translation for we're not sleeping, so we're watching. There's Muligaf, which is a movement for liberty, equality. It's a, you know, popular neighborhood-based organization. There are other slew of feminist and peasant organizations, the ones particularly working on the canal that I mentioned, that are groups to plug into and to follow. And there are burgeoning of, you know, spaces being created by the Haitian diaspora here in the States to think about the question of what to do in the transition phase with the gangs, right? Coming with an abolitionist perspective, like, can we approach this next moment, you know, differently and without more devastation? So there are these different conversations happening. I'm happy to share with the, you know, this network more information of groups people might want to follow. And like I said, it's, you know, organized locally, I think, around the gun control issue, which I think could impacts all of us, right? Like the zones of peace campaigns that certain organizations are pushing for. I don't know if that fully answers the question, boy.
Yes, it does. I will. Yeah, we'll now move. You know, and I'll follow up to get
Yes.
the links and all of that. I'll ask Nanri to ask our last question. We've been here for 2 hours and almost 30 minutes now. So let's move towards winding up. Yes, Nanri.
Yeah, so yeah, just really appreciating everyone. And also, you can look out for, we will post the organizations once we get those on all the various platforms. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you know, I learn so much every time I'm in these conversations. Now I just want to go learn about the canal. And it's always amazing to me because the stories that we often hear are not the stories that we need to hear. And there are oftentimes so much inspiration that we can draw from just people that are doing this in ways that are not visible. And I appreciate you speaking also to the, you know, to the gap in terms of who can amplify what they're doing on social media And so many organizations don't have the time or the following while they're doing the work, deep grassroots work on the ground. And so that's also important to lift up as well today. Yeah, so just in closing, we just like to give the floor to, we've lost some of our panelists along the way, which is fine. We appreciate them being here. But yeah, just a closing statement from everyone, just 30 seconds, one or two sentences. You can speak to, how you as a Pan-Africanist, support struggles like what's going on in Haiti or Pan-Africanism more generally, or something you want to say to your communities about the conversation, to round up the conversation that we've had today. So I'll hand it over just to my left. And I see Mishka. And then Mishka, you can just hand it over to the next person.
Sure. Yes, thanks again to everyone for just being with this conversation today. The energy was really good, and the questions and the statements and the information I learned was very important. Just to not spend too long, I feel very strongly that Pan Africanism for Southern Africa, for Cape Town and the Western Cape, where I am right now, it 100% needs to come back on the table. People need to be reminded of, the philosophy of Black self-reliance, that we are people and that we need to stay together, because I see the racial discrimination of the apartheid state and of the times before coming into our political system. Like Toivo touched upon with the coalition, but just in the political parties that are gaining strength and that are gaining following are extremely divisive. And it's very sad. It's very, very sad. And I'm just quite scared at what's going to happen. And why I feel that the communities here need to learn about Haiti is because we have areas here, the spatial planning of the apartheid system is so real. We have areas here that are controlled by gangs, some that I grew up very close to, that are no-go zones during unrest, where the cops don't go. There's no help, there's nothing. So, and people feel very isolated. They feel like it's their own struggle. They feel like it's their own journey to overcome and get some sort of comfort niche for themselves. And I think they just need to be reminded of the broader philosophy that is coming with this, and be strengthened by that, and be strengthened by the shared experiences of other places. And yeah, thank you so much. I'll pass on to Rukoni.
Oh, thank you so much. For me, there's so much to say, but the important thing is to always find a political home, a home for organizing. As Comrade Toivo so eloquently told us in the beginning, we must organize at the grassroots. One of our Pan-Africanist ancestors, Dr. Abdulrahman Babu from Tanzania, at the 7th Pan-African Congress in Kampala, he always emphasized that we should not agonize, we must organize. Because as Taiwo said, we are enough. We can be the solution to our problems. And I think one area of organizing among Pan-Africanists that has been ignored is a reform or transformation of our educational syllabuses. Personally, I didn't know anything about Haiti, except to talk about maybe people who came, to hear somebody is coming from Haiti. But in my education system, nothing was taught about the Haitian Revolution, which is a scandal. We must make sure that we are providing to our population education that teaches about the global African community, which includes the continent and its diasporas. So that's where I will stop. Thank you.
Let's move to Celestine.
My point is, would concur with what the CD Comrade Lupa said. The education, it all boils down to the education, because without the modification or the addition of education, we won't have the type of people who at least be in the venues of decision making who are informed of it. For instance, Mohamed Lupa said that he had no idea about the Haitian struggle wasn't embedded in the education system of his country. So I would say that education should be informed, if not restricted, but between us who are in the intellectual fora, I would say that should this conversation of Pan-Africanism should be discussed and should be revitalized, because in my generation, for instance, we find, let's say, almost 80% of my emotions, they are against Pan-Africanism, or they don't even understand the Pan-Africanism. Or when you listen to them, they provide solutions which have already been prescribed by Pan-Africanism, but they don't understand it. So I say that to boil down to education. Through education is when flags of solidarity can be stronger. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Celestine and Namira.
Yeah, I'm gonna sound like a bit of a broken record, just to reiterate what folks have said here already, which I think the Pan-African Sunday School is already doing, which is to create these opportunities to speak across territories where African people live and struggle, so that we can understand the common conditions. Yes, there were those we can speak of, in the mid 20th century who gave us great analysis, but we're doing the work of updating it here, and connecting. And I think that's super important. Some of us have said that despite, our horror at Kenya accepting to play blackface for the US, it actually created, as, empire and capitalism creates its own conditions for undermining and overthrow. It has created the possibility for us to think more deliberately, across these different territories, right? Putting Haiti into a conversation with different African countries, or even Black US and Black Latin America is super important. So I think, keeping these conversations going, drawing more connections to expose, the global matrix, I think is the work. And so, just commending it and asking for more.
Thank you so much. On that note, it's a very good note to end, because next week we have another session, same time, same and even more platforms where we'll be live streaming. And this time we are moving to talk about Palestine. We're moving to talk about African solidarity, people-led solidarity, but also interrogating African states' engagement with Israel. So this is to say, make a date with us. Join us next weekend, Sunday, same time, same platforms and more, and bring all the questions. It's a continuation of the conversation that we're having today. But this time we're having the context of Palestine. So I want to say thank you to my co-host today, Nanri, but also the other co-host, who has been making sure everything is running smoothly. The most silent are the ones who do the most work. Crystal, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thank you for making this possible. Both of you, Nanri and Crystal, are amazing. And without your work, we wouldn't be here. May whatever you throw to the ground flourish. And thank you to the speakers for sparing time on a Sunday to come and teach, to come and learn. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in from wherever you are. I know we have people from all the, I was about to say all the planets, no, all the continents. From Australia, where I don't know what time it is, to Africa, to Europe, to Asia, to the Americas. I know Europe shouldn't be a continent, but we'll talk about that another time. Thank you for joining us, and we will be with you again on Sunday to talk about Palestine. And we'll also do the follow-ups. We'll share the materials, the resources that Mamira promised us. Thank you again, and the struggle continues.
Thanks, everyone.